All right, what's up, guys? I hope you're doing well. If you couldn't tell, one of the things that really kind of interests me is monetary policy. Just kind of the whole, I guess, idea of money on how all that stuff works in general. It's part of the reason why I've been studying it and kind of trying to create stuff. And as I teach myself, try to kind of show others as well, because it seems like it's something that people have there's a rather large lack of understanding, which is unfortunate because it is pretty important. At least, anyways. Sorry, I got distracted. But I've been pretty U.S. focused for the past month or so from all the content and such. So I thought we'd take a little trip across the pond and kind of look at what the EU is doing or what could possibly be doing in the future. So that being said, I found this article that we will hop over to. This one, yeah, sure. Make sure it's working. Yeah, cool. There we go. Okay, so fiscal policy will remain accommodative, but prudence is not out the door, right? So, big surprise, accommodative fiscal policy, but also they have their issues are a lot different than ours. At least there's some similarities, obviously. To my understanding, they're undergoing significant inflation as well. Um, in terms of energy prices, a hell of a lot worse than we are. But especially when you look at natural gas prices, I think they're like, um, I think I saw something to where like theirs was up like it was either like 35. I think it was like 35 times or something. Don't quote me on that because I don't remember exactly off the top of my head, but it was like orders of magnitude more than the United States, I think. But anyways, um, they're expecting that fiscal policy in the short run is probably not enough to avoid a market slowdown or even a recession, and in the long run, it is likely to remain more expansionary, resulting in tough choices on burden sharing, spending rules, and fiscal adjustment. Right. So at a national level, governments had started 2022 moving away from very expansionary policies toward normalization as the pandemic had moved into a less impactful phase for the economy. But the new geopolitical reality is now adding fiscal spending needs, likely reversing the course of Eurozone governments. Um, so, also, they're expecting higher structural spending beyond 2022 as well, which means like I mean with Russia Ukraine, the first way that they see this panning out in terms of fiscal spending is defense spending is set to increase significantly. Or let's see, the example they give is Germany led the way by announcing plans to use 100 billion euros from the 2022 budget on the military and reach a 2% of GDP annual defense spending in the years to come. I think there's actually a commitment for the EU or for being a member of NATO on how much like of your GDP you have to give for for defense spending because it's a defensive alliance. So the EU summit in Versailles agreed on substantially increasing defense expenditure and investment, boosting military spending to 2% of GDP. Would result in the eurozone budget deficit surpassing 4% of GDP, and it is currently at just 1.5%. Um, if all other expenditures are uh, unchanged. Another way they see this changing within fiscal policy is having a much larger emphasis on energy dependency. Obviously, with Russia being a major energy producer and through multiple avenues, really. Um, Not even just energy, but without energy security, you don't have security, period. If you can't keep the lights on, I mean, you're not going to really be able to stop anyone from or other developed countries from basically having their way with you for the most part. I'm sure there's some arguments to state otherwise, but I don't really see how that changes much. Um, anyways, and I've done a few videos earlier in the week about the investments in renewables that they've been doing and how that's been going on. I think they said the world average for like total energy production coming from renewables is 10.3%, I believe, according to some. I keep forgetting the name, but it's some environmental agency slash entity. I think it's a think tank or whatever you want to call it. But but yeah, but keep in mind they're also investing in gas and electricity infrastructure as well, because you do need to transport this stuff. Another way that they see fiscal policy changing is basically greater support for households to counter the effects of higher energy prices on them. So, fair enough. Um, Here's a little chart based on countries. Says additional military spending would add to already significant budget deficits, where the basically for each country, I think it shows adding basically the shortfall from 2%. So they're just adding 2%, or what would make the difference, I guess. So 2% of the country's GDP should be spending on defense. So defense spending. Um, and if it's not, then this is what it would be if they did. The orange part is kind of extending it. So the larger the orange part means the less that country is spending on defense relative to their GDP. And I think this is a chart of all their deficits. Um, and this is sourced from the World Bank. So I think the only one that didn't have a deficit was Luxembourg out of 2020. And that was it. So fair enough. Sounds like the United States almost. Um, in that respect, at least. So there are no easy choices on the table here. The structural increase in spending is going to come with either the running up of already high national debt levels, which would mean a further breach of the Stability and Growth Pact, and realistically demand more far reaching reform, austerity with other parts of the government budget, or further steps towards a transfer union. So I didn't know this until I read this article or this page or whatever you want to call it. The Stability and Growth Pact. I didn't know this was a thing. I guess it kind of makes sense with the Eurozone, but yeah, that's something I'll probably look more into because it seems interesting and I didn't know about it until now. But we do not expect far-reaching reforms from SP or SGP that Sustainability and Growth Pact that would exclude investments at this point. So it would indeed. So if indeed the war results in groundbreaking decisions, we would expect it in some form of joint debt issuance, which I'm assuming they're basically talking about the Eurozone in general and not maybe individual countries. Um, so fiscal policy will remain accommodative in the years ahead, but not excessively accommodated. So it'll be interesting to see how they define that, because at least from looking at the stuff for the Federal Reserve over here in the United States, um, they like to be kind of honestly reading the Federal Reserve reports reminds me a lot of like theoretical physics lectures when I was in college. There was a lot of hand waving and let it be to the reader to prove whatever concept they were trying to teach and just kind of basically take it um, as a axiom or axiom. Yeah, axiom, I think is what we call them or whatever, some characteristic or concept, whatever you want to call it. But basically just like don't worry about how it actually happens, like the actual proof of it, just kind of take it to be true. There's a lot of that. So basically, like for example, defining the difference between limited reserves and ample reserves in terms of a monetary policy framework from the Federal Reserve. And I did a I don't want to say extremely in depth because I don't think it was extremely in depth, but I definitely dug down a bit in that post, going more into the different frameworks, at least from my understanding. So it seems a lot like that, to where it's like, oh, this isn't excessive, and it just kind of depends on pretty much purely political reasons. Could be completely wrong. They could, and like the actual their actual like the ECU, or what is it, whatever the European bank is, just ECB. Yeah, that acronym. There's so many acronyms when it comes to finance that I just don't. You get them mixed up. But the European Central Bank. Um, I haven't looked at their stuff, to be honest. I've been mostly looking at the Fed, for obvious reasons. But so yeah, and how accommodative this fiscal policy can then become depends on whether defense and energy independent spending is funded centrally or not. Whether there will be substantial SGP reform, and whether the ECB continues to be a important player in the bond market. So by that statement, it kind of sounds a lot like they're doing quantitative easing, or maybe some variation of it, because I know there's different ways of implementing it. Like I know the way that Japan did it, and I don't remember if it was the late '90s or early 2000s, or what exactly the timeline is on them. But the way they did quantitative easing is different than what the Federal Reserve does with quantitative easing. I also know that they had like special purpose vehicles in which they would do like junk bond market stuff and backstop that as well. But I don't have any charts or data on that one yet. Definitely in the pipeline though. I could definitely plan on getting more in depth on that. So I like the charts and everything else that goes along with it, and just kind of see how things playing together. So that's all for this one. So if you guys like kind of looking across the pond at the oh my God, the EU, all of these acronyms that start with E, I keep mixing them up for some reason. But yeah, just let me know what you guys enjoy. I'll look more into that as well, because all of these topics and stuff I'm interested in. And so if there's specific questions, or like if you guys ask me a question and I don't know, I will 100% like research it and try to and do a video on it. 100%. Part of the reason why I'm doing this kind of format with the live streams and stuff is, as I'm learning about this stuff, I'm also sharing it. And then if you guys have questions and I don't know the answer, then I'll look it up and I learn more. You guys learn something. I'm sure someone else out there has to have the same question. But anyways, that's it for this one. So I hope you guys have a good night, and I will see you on the next one.